It was kind of silent. Okay, so this is our second film. Very different, well, I shouldn't say very, but different from the first film, even though it's another nature film. Maybe a little bit more of a traditional nature documentary, Chasing Coral. So basically the film focuses on the idea of coral bleaching, which is why coral reefs end up dying out. I thought the film, as I mentioned in the notes, was sort of divided into two parts. The first half giving a lot of information about coral and focusing on one particular person, Richard, who, it's interesting, he doesn't really know much about coral, although he likes the ocean, which I guess is a good thing to focus on because most people watching film probably don't know a whole lot about coral either. So it's a way to get the backstory involved. And then the second half kind of shifts over to Zach, who is a coral nerd, as he self-describes himself, really into it kind of thing. And we start to shift a little bit into the more ecology, environmentalist side of things. I mentioned at the bottom something that I had learned way back when on the first Earth Day, and probably a lot of you have heard it too, that think globally but act locally. So, you know, you think about water pollution as a global problem, but what you should do is be checking the local streams and people who are dumping, you know, things in the gutter and it goes into a storm drain. But with things like the coral reefs, it's kind of hard to think locally. Even if the coral reef is local to you, you can't really change it. There's not a whole lot you can do locally for it. It's a global issue. So it's a much, much bigger story than the story of the octopus teacher. This film did win the Audience Award in 2017 at the Sundance Film Festival. And I believe the last time I looked at Rotten Tomatoes, it had like 100% fresh or maybe 95% fresh, which is their way of rating that people who have rated it really like it. So hopefully people enjoyed this one, but it is different than the other one. The reason I chose this film and the third film in this group is because they focus pretty much on a person or persons personal story along with the environment. So, and I mentioned this last time, and true for these two films too, if you have any personal connections to the environment or something in the film, like a personal environmental kind of connection, that would be a good thing. My only connection to diving is that I tried it at one time. I had a bad accident surfing when I was a teenager and almost drowned. And I have a fear of deep water, even though I know swimming in 15 feet of water is not different than swimming in 55 feet of water. I'm afraid of deep water. So I took a diving class to get my diving certificate because I thought it would help me overcome the fear. It did not. I was still fearful. But we went on one dive off the Jersey coast, and they took us to a place where if you go down to the bottom of the ocean there's no life. There's this layer of like black muck. Now, this is going back into the 1970s. And it's from when New York and New Jersey used to take out their barges of garbage, processed garbage, and dump it in the ocean. He was allowed to do that. It would go down to the bottom and it would settle and go across, and it would just kill everything, all the plant life and everything. And of course, then all the fish and everything else. It was quite disgusting. They're not allowed to do that anymore. But that's sort of one of the things that comes up in this film, and it especially comes up in the third film, is that for centuries, people thought, look, the ocean is so big, you can't really hurt it by dumping stuff in it. It'll just dissipate. It'll just go away. And of course, we discovered in the last 50 years that that's absolutely not true. We can't damage the ocean. So we'll just start with, if anybody has a general comment before we hit the discussion areas here, something about the film. Mostly if you liked something about the film or connected with something in the film. Anybody want to start us off? Otherwise, we'll look at the questions. And Jill will kind of look to see if somebody's raising a hand, either this way or using the little hand raise thing.
Raymond, I don't know if you want to say what you said in the chat out loud.
Sure, I wouldn't mind. And I did email this to Ken already. My recommendation for him, especially, of the it's on Netflix now. It's a miniseries called Connected. It's a science series, but it's a very fun, sort of like a nerdy, very nerdy, cute, geeky science boy. He's now the host of Radiolab on WNYC. And there's 6 segments, and one of them is on poop, which, my 10-year-old boy comes out and giggles. But it talks about what's at the bottom of the ocean and why, and very science, very factual, very interesting, very quick moving. 6 episodes on Connected. You can read about it on Netflix. Thank
There
you.
was also an episode on Nature last week of about octopus that was really interesting. And I think Jill might send it out in a future thing. I came across a webinar that features 2 people talking about under the ocean, and one is the person from Chasing Coral, and the other person's the person who's next week's film, which is just a weird kind of coincidence, or if you believe in synchronicity, it's synchronicity. So I'm going to watch that and see what comes up. Okay, so let's look at the questions then, unless somebody else has it. So I put at the top this time directorial choices. There are decisions the director always makes, and sometimes you'll agree with those choices and sometimes you will not. So I put 4 choices that he made that you might agree with or not, and so we can talk about those if people have thoughts on them. So Orlowski's approach does not follow the unwritten documentarian code of being objective. It really is an unwritten kind of code. A lot of people say, documentary is supposed to be objective, not supposed to take sides. But a lot of documentaries do take sides. They have a definite point of view that they want to do. I think this is kind of a trick question, but could he have been more objective in his film? Because he definitely has a point of view. Think about the trick question part, maybe. What is the other point of view? So huge silence here. The whole world is muted at the moment. Joyce, I
Go
see a
ahead,
hand.
Sandy.
I would
go
just
ahead.
say you can have another point of view. You just have to be arguing that the coral isn't turning, what is it called, bleached. You'd have to say it's not. So how could you prove that it's not when it is? I mean, it's like a given.
Yeah. Well, actually, that's the trick question part of it. But I mean, the other point of view would be, maybe it is dying, the coral, but what does it have to do with climate change or people? It's just that's what happens. Coral dies, and it's dying. It's just a cycle. So, I mean, obviously, these people don't believe that point of view, so they don't bring it in. So it is not objective. But you could do a film that interviewed a few other people who believe that coral dies for other reasons. It has nothing to do with climate change because there is no climate change. But this definitely has a point of view. It is not meant to be objective at all.
All right, we have Sandy and then Marilyn.
Okay.
Okay, I was going to say that a lot of the criticisms that I read online were that it wasn't necessarily climate change, that it could have been trawling, fishing, and other causes. Most of them were sort of man-made pollution and things, but they were not attributing it necessarily to climate change.
Right.
That's it. Same idea.
Yeah. Someone else?
But I think they proved it by 95-degree ocean off Australia. I mean, I thought 85 was high, and they said that coral can't live in water that's that hot. So I think it's indisputable.
Well, I mean, they would say that you're correct, and that's what they tried to prove, and they believe they did prove that it is certainly a change in the climate. And like I said, the only caveat you can throw in there is there are people who believe there's climate change, but
Right.
that it's not because of man. It's just part of a cycle, and it happens. And maybe millions of years ago, coral died out and new corals started. They don't believe that, but I
Yeah,
think,
but the rate at which,
yes,
Yeah.
the rate is the big thing. I think Karen might have been
Eye-opening.
raising her hand too. Karen?
I think that our senators and House of Representatives should view this movie. You know, there's a lot of people that don't think there's climate change and the icebergs aren't melting and fish aren't dying. And I think that this would be when you come into the Senate or the House, this should be one of your required viewings.
I have a feeling some people wouldn't show up, but I think it's a good idea. Yeah. Well, I mean, all three of these films, the other thing about all three of them in my mind is that one of the solutions offered is education, that people have to be informed. That's one way you're going to change. You can say, like, what am I going to do to save the coral? I can't go out and stop, climate change or anything like that, but you can educate people about it. And that's definitely part of the solution. The second thing I put there is, they chose this Richard, I think his name is Vevers, but it could be Vevers, who's an advertising exec. That's what he was known for. And he becomes kind of the featured character, especially in the first half. Now, he is interested in oceans. And it seems like the reason he was chosen, besides his interest in oceans, is that he thought he could bring his advertising background to a way to promote the film and promote the cause and things. Did you think he was a good person to feature? Like I said, he's featured. Obviously, there are a couple other people featured too. And then Zach is featured in the second half. Was that a good way to approach the characters in the film? Like in Octopus Teacher, really, you had really one character, one person, and then the son comes in for a bit. But other than that, it really focuses. This has probably 5 people, but 2 focused. Any thoughts on Mr. Richard?
Sandy has a question again.
So I loved him in the beginning. I thought when he said that the toilet paper 3-ply versus 4-ply, and then he said, and his dimple showed up, and he was just so cute. He goes, well, it was just so funny. He goes, well, I thought maybe I could be doing something better with my life. And I just loved that intro. It was like in the first 4 minutes of the movie. And then I adored Zach in the second half. So I saw no problem with the way they structured it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good choices then for your point of view. Good choices. Anyone else on the characters chosen? Marilyn?
I like the difference of ages and, and where they came from, their backgrounds. Yeah. I thought that was impressive in how, education can, turn you around. And, at the end with them doing that bus tour through the country, I mean, to grab young people so that they're aware from the get-go, I think is wonderful and gives us hope.
Yeah, like I said, I think the Richard character, one of the things is that he really did hope that even though his background's not this kind of science, that his background in advertising and promotion and stuff could play a part in there. And usually that's a producer, would be the producer role. You wouldn't be on screen, but, he's on screen. And I agree with Sandy. I think he's charismatic, but I thought he also sat in for the person who doesn't know a whole lot and wants to learn more, just loves the ocean, but wants to learn more about it. And he's that character. And I thought that was a really interesting way to approach it. Someone else on this point?
Dan?
Yeah, I thought he was more like us. He was somebody who didn't know too much about what's going on in the area. And he was talking to that woman who was explaining what the coral are, that they're really animals. And so I felt like I was learning at the same time that he was. So I thought that was great. As far as the objectivity, the being objective, the Orlowski, I thought that when Zach says in the second part of the movie, he says, is it something to the effect, is it bad that I'm getting personal about this? So that was not only Zach's attitude, but it was also Orlowski's attitude that I think where he stood on the matter of what was going on was pretty obvious. And he thought he really felt badly. I felt that he felt badly about what was going on. So it wasn't objective. It was, to a large extent, it was subjective.
Marilyn again there, or someone else?
Did you
Maybe
watch
Jenny?
the faces of the scientists in the audience when they were watching this? And you could see one woman wiping away tears. They all looked like they were on the verge of tears. I was also, you know, we don't realize what's in our oceans because we just don't experience it. And I don't have the science background. I guess my biology teacher's son probably does, but I don't. And I mean, I believe in conservation and, you know, preserving and whatever, but this was like in your face wake up call.
Well, you know, a lot of pretty photography, nature documentaries can take you under the water and you see beautiful coral and you see the fish and the colors are fabulous. You know, people call them like the David Attenborough style, you know, documentaries and things. But that's not going to turn you on to what's actually going on out there. I mean, you're going to say it's beautiful and I'd love to go see that. So in this one and in the one that comes afterwards, the third film, at times they go to a place where we have photographs of what it looked like once before and what it looks like now. And when you see that dramatic change, you're like, you're shocked, you know? And like you said, some people are in tears. I mean, these scientists study this stuff. And I think most of them, you know, they don't approach it in a cold way. They love what they study, you know? I knew somebody whose specialty was spiders. And I mean, he loves spiders. He knew everything about them. And, you know, it pained him that people would kill a spider on a wall in their house, you know, and things like that. So I think that kind of shows up.
Jennifer?
Yes, I thought that the audience really was mesmerized by this young guy's speech. And I do agree with Marilyn that the more young people that get involved in this, it's just really a good thing, because as the older guy said that when you grow older, are you going to like yourself because you did what was the right thing, or are you not, you know? So it gives a lot of young people food for thought about the environment and so on.
And each of these three films, and it's true for a lot of documentaries now, but each of these three films also have a website that you can go to that's either about the film and not just promotional, but like how to get involved, what you can do, or it's an actual nonprofit that's not, you know, connected to the film in any way other than the film promotes that particular thing. The octopus teacher guy, he started a group and things like that. And there's one for this one too. I think I listed it in here somewhere. I don't see it at the moment, but I think it's in here. But the other thing is, I'm going to jump over one for a second here, because the previous film by Orlowski is called Chasing Ice. So you see a little title pattern there. And that was about the melting icebergs. And that's also a good film. I like this one better. But that's a good film, and it's the same idea. Like, you can actually see something that indicates to you that something is changing in the climate and the environment. There's like physical evidence here. The coral's gone, the icebergs are calving and dropping and things like that and everything. So he kind of followed the same thing. They're both Netflix documentaries, and Netflix is paying for a lot of documentary work now. So is HBO and things like that, and they're quite good. They're documentaries. The other one that he did just last year is called The Social Dilemma, which has nothing to do with the environment. It has to do with social media and stuff. I would also recommend that. That's a little bit of a frightening documentary, because it's like how much they know about you. I had a person I was talking to about the fact that I was going to put in to get my vaccine this month. And they said, really? Because, you know, I'm hearing that there's a microchip in there and they can track you when they do that. And I said, oh, come on. I said, you don't really believe that, do you? I said, by the way, I said, I want to tell you, I said, I have a microchip on me right now that's tracking everything that I do and everywhere that I go. Yeah. And I did the same thing. I held up my iPhone. I said, this is it. It's already doing it. And I volunteered, I paid for it even, kind of thing. So no, I'm not worried about a microchip in there. But I'm going to go backwards on this one, because The Social Dilemma, like I said, is frightening, because it shows you all the stuff they know about you if you're involved in social media. And if you go back to the previous question, he doesn't use in this film like scare tactics or a lot of pessimism. A lot of nature films will try to show you like, you know, dead carcasses of whales and things like that. And it's like, it's really shock value. Like you look at it and you go, oh my God, that's so hard to look at. Look at this, what they did to the seals. They're butchering the seals and stuff. And they don't really do that in this film. And I know that that has a kind of powerful impact on some people, but they avoided it. And it's not even though the coral is dying in places, it's somewhat optimistic, I think. And so is the third film. And I ask here, does that lessen the impact of the message? Is it necessary to include that sort of really shocking footage in order to convince an audience to make a difference? I don't know if you've seen films like that. If there's no one, I'm going to add one more thing. I think Stan is raising a hand, maybe. Stan.
My association with that, in terms, somebody mentioned, I think it was Marilyn who mentioned that some of the material was pretty shocking. And years ago, they used to try to discourage people from smoking by showing a smoker's lungs, and that they were pretty dark and pretty black, and a normal person's lungs. And that used to be pretty shocking. So I think I didn't think of it until now, but I think the fact that they showed the colors and that the coral had to reinvent itself before it died in terms of colors and in terms of the ultraviolet rays getting to it, and I think it was fluorescing. That was pretty shocking in a very almost subtle way, and you have to think about that. Between the whiteness of the coral, the bleaching of the coral, and then you have what it looks like now. It's like I thought the coloration was very shocking. The comparison.
Yeah, there are some things that are shocking in the documentary, but you could have had more shocking stuff, I think, and that is a technique that documentary filmmakers use. And I'm not saying it's wrong, it's a different technique which they kind of stayed away from. You mentioned the smoking thing. I remember seeing in school smoking ones where, they would also have a container. This is how much tar would be in like a year's worth of cigarettes, and they would pour it, which is, disgusting, but, that's actually not what's in there, but, they do that. And if you were of an age, you probably had a driver's ed video about drunk driving where you saw these horrible car crashes and things like that, and it was supposed to scare you away from being a drunk driver. They don't go for it in this film, and I didn't know if people would think that they maybe should have put a little bit more in for shock value. I don't personally think they should have, but that's a choice that they made. Okay. The second item that I put here is the filmmaking. This film of the three spends more time than the others on talking about actually putting together a documentary like this. It really gets into the filmmaking, the problems that they have, camera problems, weather problems, all kinds of things like that, which I find interesting because I like filmmaking. I'm not sure everybody finds it interesting. And I said this film makes its point not through arguments, but through film's greatest strength, which is visuals. One thing that I saw compared to, and who was it, Marilyn, that had read some reviews, one of them said, thank goodness it wasn't like An Inconvenient Truth, Al Gore's film, which had like PowerPoint slides and things like that. Like, I prefer this kind of, show me the evidence, don't give me a chart and things like that. And that is a kind of choice they made. So I noted a couple of things that they did here. They made these 2-minute videos of coral, and they were out there 25 times a day in order to do it. These time-lapse photography was a really big thing that the team thought they should use as part of their like photography approach to the film. Did you think that the time lapse was effective? There was a lot of it used in there, the time lapse photography. I mean, the first film we saw, there was none. So, Joyce?
Totally effective. You could see that healthy, vibrant, alive plant, and it looked like a piece of dirt afterwards. It was awful. I mean, you know, in a million years, I probably never would have seen a movie like this unless I was in a movie class. And I learned things that I never would have learned before. And also, aside from the time lapse, which I thought was very effective, the passion that these people had over what they were doing. And the guy from, what was it, the older guy from Australia at the end?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what I think made me feel how much I didn't know. And that, I mean, you know, you guys might have known this, but I didn't know coral was related to us and all the things that are happening. I don't know that much about climate change, but it has an effect on us every day, and nobody knows that. And that's why education is always the best, is always the best way to start if we could educate kids early enough, which we can't always do. But yes, I thought that the time lapse was the only thing they probably could use, because how could you see the before and after, and how it was taking place at that moment?
Well, I mean, you could show sort of fake time lapse if you had photographs of, like, say, the icebergs, for example. Here's one from 1950, one from 1962. But the fact that they did the time lapse, and it was very short term, in only 2 months' time, you could see the coral changing. This isn't over years or centuries or something like that. 2 months, you could see the changes. I thought that was the most effective thing about the time lapse, is that it didn't have to be a long period of time to be effective in showing us that things had changed. I mean, you couldn't do a time lapse that showed years and years unless, like I said, you kind of fake it with photographs and things like that. So I thought it was very effective. They also did the aerial photography, which is not quite the same, but I thought that photography also had an interesting impact when you saw it from the air. Jennifer?
Yes, I was impressed with the determination, the frustration and the determination of the photographers to go down there for 25 days every day and, photograph that. It was just amazing, the difficulties they had, and they still pulled it off.
This is one of the things, anytime I taught a film class, adults or younger people, but especially with younger people, the amount of time it takes to put together film. I mean, you watch a film, it's 90 minutes, but there might be 200 hours worth of film that they shot, or video, and the editing time, the months they spent editing and things like that to get this 90 minutes. The best thing I think that hit kids the most is when I had kids do animation, and we would do like stop motion animation where you're clicking like a frame at a time, and you need 24 of those frames to make 1 second. And they would work all afternoon on their animation, and they'd end up with, 4.5 seconds of film. And they're like, oh my God, how long does it take to do one of those Disney movies? A long time. They do it differently now, but a long time it takes. Yeah, a lot of work put into it. So I also like that part of the filmmaking that they show, that you, like you said, Jennifer, you appreciate the fact that the diligence of putting together a film like this, how much time it's taken.
And the expense of doing it underwater in salt water, and how much equipment didn't they lose during that time with that salty water.
Amy has a quick question, and then Karen.
Yeah, so that 2 month time period, I thought that was actually based on two things. That came about because, one, they knew that there was going to be an event that was taking place and they didn't want to miss it. So they had that narrow time to do it. And number two, there was an issue with the camera, with the filming of it. Yeah. And they didn't have time to get anything else together that was going to work. And because it was coming up and because it was so limited, it's like they had no choice but to do that time lapse thing where they were doing the dives 25 times a day and doing it. So I think it was like, out of necessity, basically, to not miss this opportunity, they did it. And what I really liked about that particular part was when we got to see the presentation at the conference that they were at. I just really liked the way that they displayed the time lapse of it, where they went through, a couple of the, of the diminishment, and then brought you back to what it had originated with. I thought that was so effective because that was really how you could see the contrast. It's like you went through the deterioration and then you were back to what it used to be. And then knowing that it was only a 2-month interval. So I thought it was really, really effective, but I think it was necessity that made them operate in that way.
I agree with everything you said, and I think it was necessity. But if you had asked me, a novice at all this kind of thing, what if we go down and film for 2 months the coral reef to show people how it changes? My guess would have been, you're not really going to see much happen in 2 months. I mean, that would be like if I went down the Jersey Shore in June and photographed something, and then I went back in August and photographed again. How different it's going to be? I don't think it would change that much. That's what really got me, that in 2 months, you could actually see the changes occurring. I mean, that means if we wait 10 more years, what's going to happen? They can't possibly survive. They can't survive. Anyone else? I think it was Karen. Karen?
I was in awe of the determination that they had, these scientists. I mean, me not being a scientist, you just take a lot of things for granted. And just that beginning about them trying to make an underwater camera. Now, I would just say, here's, you get a camera, it can go under, you've seen regular cameras you can take underwater to make underwater pictures. And you just think, oh, that's just an underwater camera. But the amount of things that they did, and then it didn't work. Things were blurry. So it's not like you're a scientist and you can do this and wham, bam, it's done. It's like all of a sudden this didn't work, so they had to do more things. And I just really take my hat off to the way that the people kept going and kept going and kept going as a scientist. And Zach, he even said he got discouraged a little bit of that time. I mean, you keep going and going and going, and sometimes you do get discouraged, but then you have to go on and keep going. So I enjoyed the tenacity and the encouragement that the scientists had.
Joyce?
I just think that going on a completely human level and not a plant or level is that anybody who has such passion for what they do has to affect some change somehow or make you interested in what they do, because they wake up, not just these people, but anybody with passion. They wake up, they eat, drink, and breathe, what they're doing every day. And so that's the part of it that sort of attracts you to the movie, I think, the determination that they have to show you and make something happen. Does that sound trite?
No, because I said I partially at least picked all three films because there was a personal connection to their subject. Not just, like I said, pretty pictures of the ocean or something like that, but some people who were involved very deeply in what they were doing, and they're part of the film. You don't have to do that. You can do a documentary and, the director never comes involved, the narrator you never see or anything like that. That's not what these three films were trying to do. Marilyn.
I thought one other really effective part of the film was when they showed people all over the world where this was happening. It was just mind-boggling and eye-opening, and just points up that this is an emergency and we need to deal with it now. We can't wait.
And I would think you might have trouble with an audience from, say, parts of the United States, like the Midwest, even New Jersey, though, like we don't have coral, reefs and things that we know of and things like that. So it seems far away. These problems seem so far away. So it's hard to connect with them, kind of thing.
But it's like, it's like with the flooding in the coastal areas and all the areas around the world where people are not going to be able to live. And we're talking millions of people, and they're going to have to live somewhere else. It may not affect us, right here, but globally, it does affect all of us. And, just because we're in our little bubble, we need to look beyond our bubble and, and try to, do something in our small way here that contributes to things being better for everybody.
The third topic I had was optimism, and one of the reasons I chose the three films because I thought they all were rather optimistic. There are a lot of downer environmental films, and I understand there's probably a place for those films too. I told Jill that maybe we'll give you a list at the end of some of the other films that are on Netflix that you might be interested in if these things interest you, but some of them are quite brutal. There's one about orca whales and how the places like SeaWorld and stuff treated them and things like that. And I started to watch it, and about halfway through I said, oh, this is rough. This is really rough to watch, and this is brutal, and I don't think I want to do this as a film. But yeah, it's important to get that message out, and it may change. The film made changes in places like SeaWorld and stuff, but it just was down. But these three films, I thought there was a note of optimism, at least in all of them. So this one, I said, I find it to be surprisingly optimistic. Some of the optimism comes from the enthusiasm of the participants, which a number of you have mentioned. I would compare the portrayal of the coral bleaching to the heartbreak of someone seeing someone wasting away from a preventable cancer and feeling like you can't prevent it. It's like, oh my God, this is happening. And what can I do? I mean, we could have prevented this or made it better if we had done something 50 years ago, but I don't know that I can do anything. The trip to the Great Barrier Reef, I think, was one of them that shows this massive deterioration in the 2-month period. And the team is even demoralized. I think they really seem depressed at that point. It's really getting to them. So in what sense do you think the film is optimistic, and what does it portray as ways to save the coral? Where is the optimism and where's the hope in this? I gave away one thing before, so we'll pass on that, which is education. I think that's part of the hope, is educating, especially young people, to what the problem is. But is there any other kind of optimism or hope that you see in the film? Stan?
The end of the movie, they had the bus moving along with the kids there, and they or even before that, I think there were children who they were giving these viewers of looking at the ocean and the all the fish in there. And I also was kind of felt optimistic about the bus and going to different places, and having adults taking part in the education. And my daughter used to write for a publication called Science Connected. And one of the articles that she wrote about was talking about optimism, was about that if the scientists come across dying coral or coral that's deteriorating, they can actually graft healthy coral from another a bunch of coral and graft on that healthy coral, and the coral will grow. And so I thought about that actually, that there is hope out there. And I don't know if it makes a difference that a lot of people, the people who are interested are really going to get involved. And I think that's, these are the guys who are going to touch those people.
Well, yeah, I mean, intervention is one of the optimisms that we can, it's not too late. It's late, but it's not too late. There are still things that can be done. I think I mentioned when we did the first film that I've volunteered for a long time for endangered species in New Jersey. And the big success story is always the bald eagles coming back, because basically they had completely vanished nesting bald eagles from New Jersey. And now they're back, and it's actually a healthy population. They're no longer considered endangered. But the way we did that was by bringing eagles from other places and eggs and hatching them in, places that are not even real nests, but fake nests. And people would go up with, puppets actually that look like an eagle and things like that. You have to get them to be born here so that they'll return to do their nesting. That's very artificial, but it's like the grafting that you're mentioning. It can be done, but someone has to pay for it and be interested in doing it. And you need people who are willing to do hundreds and hundreds of hours to work on it. When I used to do classes, there's a place, Caddis Island, down near Toms River. And we used to do classes there and take kids out to do seining and see what's in the water. And we would show them that there were things in the water that weren't there 20 years ago, fish that have returned and things like that. And I always thought, like, gee, I hope one of these little kids turns out to be like a marine biologist or something like that. Wouldn't that be great? Isn't that like what you hope for as a teacher, that, you're going to send out a few people into the world who are actually going to change it? Maybe you can't, but maybe they will. You may never know it, but they will. I think that's a kind of optimism that comes up in here when you talk about the school bus and the kids, and they're looking in their viewer and seeing it. If a few of those kids get turned on to trying to do something about it. Another documentary that really hits that hard, it's not on Netflix though, is I Am Greta. I think it's on Hulu maybe or something. But the young girl who kind of took on the world with her thing. It's both optimistic and pessimistic, because she frequently feels depressed by the fact that nothing's changing. She yells at the UN people that, you talk about it, but you're doing nothing, kind of thing. So, I mean, it's sometimes hard to be optimistic, I think, in the face of some of the things that you see when you're looking at nature and the environment, but it tries to be. Anything else about the optimism or what we can change? Is that Lynn?
Lynn?
Yep.
At the end of the movie, they showed the list of who's going to use green energy and how that was going to help alleviate, the rapid progression of the global warming and everything. And that's, of course, very optimistic that cities are making these pacts to help.
All right. Well, Lynn, you set me up for my last point, so I'm going to jump to it, which is the end credits. The end credits, there's a song, and the line in the song is, "Tell me how long it will take until we wake up." And if you watch those credits, and a lot of people don't watch the credits, of course, I watch the credits, but you watch the credits, you learn what cities and countries as of 2017, when the film was made, are working to save coral reefs through local efforts. How many people watched that? Watch the end credits? Did you sit through the credits? If you did, how does the US and New Jersey fare on those credits? Sandy, I see a thumbs down. You want to explain that thumbs down?
Well, they weren't listed. The US wasn't. It was 2017 though. So it wasn't listed in 2017, and neither was New Jersey.
No, there were some cities in the United States, but nothing in New Jersey.
Yeah.
And you could say, like,
No.
well, we don't have coral reefs, so what would we be doing? No, you can protect the ocean. There are things that you can do. But so that's both an optimism that you say, look at all the places that are trying to make a difference. And then you could also look at it and say, look at all the places that aren't. But actually, you said 2017, that's important. Things that were not happening in 2017 might be happening in 2021. So you could see that as a kind of optimism kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, people have to, you see the film and you're impacted, but then, as they say, call to action. Do you go out and do anything? Whether it's send $25 to a group, or tell other people to watch the film, or pass on the information. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do. I don't expect you to jump in the water necessarily and start diving, but that you might. Somebody watching that film probably ended up doing something like that. But yeah, there is that part of it too. Okay, enough optimism.
Donna, hold on, Donna has something to say.
Okay. Oh, good, a new voice. You're still muted, Donna. Still muted. By the way, if you're on a computer, you can just press your space bar and hold it
Oh,
down.
shoot, I lost everything again.
Now you're here. We hear
you
you.
hear me?
We see you.
All right.
Go
I don't
ahead.
see anybody. There was a through line from the start of the film to the end. about optimism. I mean, he said I'm in advertising and that, my job is to find a solution. And now he's moving to this new job. And so I felt like throughout there was very, he was almost overly acting optimistic. Like it jumped out at me, but in a positive note, though, I thought, and that he really did feel at the end that we could change it. I mean, that to me was the message that came across loud and clear.
So you're saying there was a through line of optimism throughout the film.
Right. From the beginning, his first words in the beginning of the film were that, my job in advertising, I find a problem, I find a solution, and we fix it. Even though I'm tired of that job, I want to do this. At the end, he kind of said the same thing. I'm hopeful. We're going to make a change. This can be fixed, and throughout, I kept seeing a through line of optimism, even though they showed the problems and how bad they were.
So maybe this is an objectivity that the film has, which is it's optimistic, but it also shows you the pessimism in some cases. I mean, like I said, when they get depressed, when they go to the Great Barrier Reef, and when you see those things, there's a balance between we're hopeful, but things are really bad. And that's, I think, a balanced picture that they have in the film.
Mm-hmm.
Jennifer?
Yes,
I
my
lost you.
last word would be that there is hope in the young ones. There are a lot of young people who are quite excited about this. But for us older folks, I think we should turn less into the throwaway society and start recycling more and do something, in a small way. If all of us could do that, maybe we could save on the global warming, etc.
Don't release Mylar balloons. Use less plastic. I mean, almost all of those balloons that people release into the air by accident or on purpose, the shiny ones, almost all of them end up in water somewhere, a creek, stream, an ocean, a bay, or something like that. And animals always think of them as something to eat. You've probably seen some of those horror nature documentaries where they find the birds and they open the birds up and their stomachs are filled with plastic to the point that they can't eat. So they starve to death because their whole stomach is filled with plastic, and it's all kinds of plastic junk that we throw into you say, well, I don't throw those things in the water. Yeah, but you leave them on a beach, you put them in a garbage can, and they end up in the water kind of thing. So there is that kind of shock thing that I think sometimes people do. My next point,
Wait,
unless
hold on,
there's a
Sandy
hand.
had something.
Oh, I don't see her. Oh, there she is.
I wanted to bring up when he was on the boat and the people were dancing on the boat and having like the party.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was like a cool scene, because it really showed how people are oblivious. And he did seem a little depressed. I know his general mood was optimism, and he started a company after this, and he's an ocean company. But but at that moment, he looked a little bit depressed when he, saw how people are partying above this dying reef. And it was pretty profound, I thought.
I mean, that's one of the local things. Even when I was a Boy Scout, when you go into the woods, you leave it cleaner than when you went in. I often go walk in Mills Reservation and places like that. I mean, I always find a plastic bag laying there. So I pick up the plastic bag, and I always leave with things in the plastic bag because I pick up junk along the way. And you could say, like, I wish I could go in there one time and not find anything on the trail. No water bottles, no plastic, but it never happens. There's always junk on the trail because people just toss things. I mean, it's unbelievable. And the ocean is one of the biggest dumping grounds, gigantic dumping ground. There's a horrible documentary to watch because it's so heartbreaking about the great garbage whirlpool that's in the Pacific, and there's one in the Atlantic now too. I mean, it's staggering the amount of junk that's out there. And most of it is plastic because it just doesn't break down the right way.
Claire?
Okay. Claire.
Just kind of an aside, but not totally. In terms of people finding something that they could do that at a small scale to help, my son-in-law was very upset about all the plastic being thrown away. And he and a friend did some research. and they created a company that makes straws made out of pasta straws, and they're gluten-free even, and they work better than plastic straws. They last longer in the drinks. And his advertising is all showing about what's going on with the animals and how the animals are dying from the plastic straws. So pasta life, as he calls it. But anyway, that's a small way people, this is just a side little business. It's not his main business at all, but he just wanted to do something to contribute. So yes, we all can contribute in some way to the environment.
And that gets you into a lot of economic issues because, there are places that have banned plastic straws. And then you hear people on the other side say, what about the companies that make plastic straws? You're putting people out of work. You're destroying jobs and things. And my answer would be, you have to retool, just like the tobacco industry and things like. You have to retool and start producing straws that don't harm the environment. But yeah, you will hear that argument. I'm wearing my Conserve Wildlife today, sweatshirt, so that I'm feeling good about that. Okay. Is there another
Hold on, there's
question?
one more question. Jeannie, or not Jeannie, but who's with Jeannie?
Jeannie and friend.
So I found it just a general comment. I found it a very depressing film. But the optimistic way of looking at it is that changes are beginning to happen in the sense that, a simple thing like saying GM is now going to fully electric cars, for instance, in 15 years. They've committed to doing that. And the only way really that stops is climate change. And that is like a really large, a large change to be made. But when I thought about that, I thought about another documentary, which I don't know if anybody's seen. I'm also not sure where it's available. I got it from the library a while back. And it's called Who Killed the Electric Car?
Yeah.
Which is also a very sad documentary. But the interesting thing about it is that it talks about, and again, I don't have I don't know what year it was that the electric car that they tried to ramp up with the electric cars, and they they were forced to by legislation that had said they had to at least start heading in this direction, and it shows that they kind of grudgingly went along, but they made commercials which had these terrible soundtracks on them, and they kind of sold. They did not sell the idea even though they advertised it. So it's actually a fascinating thing that this could have been done, especially when you look at what's happening with things like Tesla now and with other electric car makers. So the optimistic side of it is it's actually happening now. The upsetting part about it is we could have been on this path easily 20 years ago, and we really tried. And again, I don't know the number of years I don't remember when this film was made, but the legislation to begin trying this is really certainly a long, long time ago. And it's just interesting to imagine what would have happened if we had headed down that road then.
In that documentary, was it not GM that was killing and creating the car?
Yes,
so,
at the same time.
Yeah,
right?
so there's kind of an irony in the fact that now GM is committing itself to electric cars when they were the ones that were early on the road to do it and killed it.
Right, and it's a very well made documentary. I mean, it's a really interesting documentary about how it was undercut. Again, I don't know where it's available now, but the library does have it.
Okay. Anyone else on this area? We got two more, and we're getting close on time here. So the one about Netflix is kind of quick, but the film was produced by Netflix, which has produced an increasing number of documentaries. In a way, this technology can also aid reaching a solution because Netflix's reach means that a film might be seen in its first few weeks, and in the long term by far more people worldwide than saw earlier films like An Inconvenient Truth, which won an Oscar and things too. There's no real question there, but I think part of the solution is just getting the word out. And when you see the numbers of people that watch things on Netflix worldwide, sometimes you watch a film on Netflix and at the end it starts running the credits in other languages, and it's like staggering that 280 languages has been changed to. I think that is also part of the solution. I mean, you could say it's education, but just getting the word out to people. And film in the theater is just, well, especially now, it's just not going to reach that kind of audience. You need a mass global audience for some of these things. So the last question there, in a larger sense, is really a big question. A coral reef is a perfect example of the web of life in the way that everything within the colony works together to feed and sustain the reef. The film implies, doesn't come right out and say it, that its structure can be a prototype for humanity. So this is like my English class kind of essay question. In what ways is this true? And I give you one little clue, which is one suggestion is summed up by the line, no two corals are the same, and yet they are all the same, kind of thing. So anybody have any thoughts about this large question here about what can we learn from the coral reef? Joyce?
We are all connected.
Saying this the right. Oh, Marilyn, is she speaking first?
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It doesn't matter.
We'll
I
take
just
it in
want to say
alphabetical
we're all
order.
connected.
Joyce first.
Okay, I'm kidding. I was just going to say that we're all interconnected. I mean, we're all one. And that's I guess, the simple answer to it. I mean,
Marilyn?
everything that we do is interconnected to something that you don't think it's connected to, but it is.
I don't know that most people watching the film would think of the coral reef as an example of that. I don't even know if I thought of that at first. Like somebody said, I showed this film to somebody and they said, I thought coral was like rocks because they've seen pieces of coral, but that's dead coral kind of thing.
Well, that's what I thought.
They don't think of it as a living organism. And actually many organisms, and they're all connected. And without this one doesn't work. And these fish don't come through if the coral's not there or anything. It really is the web of life, which is, a term that's been around for a long time, that everything is connected. Marilyn?
That's all that I was going to say, that, we're all connected. We may not realize how, but, what we do affects other people. It's not just us. Even if we live alone or whatever, and we think, we don't have any effect on anybody, we do in one way or another. And this was really eye-opening. I did not realize the complexity of coral reefs. So we're interdependent. We really are.
Well, another thing that you hear often in environmental discussions is diversity. Diversity of species and things like that. And coral reef is very diverse. I think that's where this one line that they mentioned in there, no two corals are the same, and yet they're all the same. Which, if you make it the larger sense, we are different than people who live in Europe and people who live in Africa and people who live in Australia. And yet, of course, we're all the same, even though we live in different biospheres and, environments and things like that. But, and I think that's a problem, diversity-wise, that people, like I said, say, there's no coral reefs around here. What am I worried about coral reefs? That's somebody else's problem. They can deal with that. Flooding. I don't live in Miami. I'm not worried about flooding where I live. I live in Kansas. There's no flooding from the ocean, things like that. That's not a great attitude. I think Sandy is getting lit up there. She might be wanting to talk.
Yes.
Go ahead, Sandy.
Okay, so I was going to also say that at the end, they showed that beautiful graphic of the coral under the sea, and then it started looking like trees. So there was that, let's not just think of this as the undersea world, but, if you look at the trees and the roots of the trees, the branches, it made you realize that the connection of, the ocean with the earth that we see, the part of it that we see. So they brought that up at the end of the movie as well.
And I'm going to connect that to something I wrote on the front side of the sheet at the beginning, which I thought was a really good analogy that they made. When people think about, like there's too much carbon dioxide, but trees take in carbon dioxide and they give off oxygen. And so plant more trees, and we need forests and stuff. But actually, the ocean and the coral reefs and stuff also do that. And I don't think a lot of people think about that. So they're saying here they're disappearing, and they're just as important to the environment as trees. And 500 million to 1 billion people rely on coral reefs as their main source of food because of the fish that live there, the sea life that live there, and that trees breathe in and exhale oxygen. And at some point, trees and the ocean were able to do this and keep things in balance. That whole idea, you can throw stuff in the ocean and it'll clean it up. It'll take care of it. The chemicals will dissipate and stuff. But we've gone beyond that. We're at that tipping point. We've gone beyond where it can't do it by itself. It can't renew itself anymore. We have to give it some kind of help in order to do it. I think Sarah and Michael.
Yeah, well, I think one of the points that was made early in the film, Richard Vivers said, out of sight, out of mind. I mean, it's under the water. You just don't think about coral reefs the way you think about rainforests and other ecosystems.
Yeah, that's a good point too. Anything else? We're coming up on our end time here. Okay, well, we do have a third
Stan
film.
has something.
Who? Okay.
Stan?
Yeah, I guess
Who's everybody here?
I don't know. I think that when scientists, environmental scientists, actually my youngest daughter is an environmental scientist. I think that when they changed the name from pollution to climate change, I think climate change is kind of a benign phrase, whereas pollution knocks you right out. So you're polluting the environment. Oh, we can go you're polluting the environment is very shocking, as opposed to, oh, we have to have climate change take place. And so I don't know. I think I'd rather see the call it what it is. Call it that you're really dirtying up the environment. You're making it unsurvivable for a lot of people. You're adding a lot of particles into the environment that are polluting to such an extent that people are dying. That's all I have to say.
Well, pollution still exists and it's still used. Actually, the bigger change, and it was more of a PR change, was when we changed from global warming to climate change. Global warming just never caught on, and people would joke about the fact, like, look outside, look at the snow, where's the global warming now, kind of thing. And global warming, you don't hear much anymore. Climate change is what it is, because in some places, the climate will get colder, and there will be more storms and more snow. And in some places, there will be less snow and less rain and things. So I think that was a good PR change that was done in the environmental community. Maybe you don't hear as much about pollution as you used to, but there's still air and water quality testing and laws and things like that. So it's still around. I don't know, Earth Day comes around every year, but it doesn't seem to have the same impact that it had when it first started. It seems to be less of an event every year, sadly. But
I think Claire has something, and then maybe we can wrap up.
Okay.
I put it in the chat that near the end of the film, they one woman stated,
Yeah.
pardon?
I would say it out loud. Share.
Oh, okay. Near the end of the film, a woman made a statement that the ecosystem will possibly die within our lifetime if things continue as they are. And more importantly, it will affect other ecosystems, which you kind of just said. But then one of the men in it said, the real question is climate change going to be bad or really bad? So there's no question that climate change is going to affect us negatively, but how badly is it going to? I thought that was a good film.
And I think my last point would be that, and you often hear this in environmental discussions, is that for people who are older, it's always said, like, what will you tell your children or your grandchildren you did? Like, if they look back and they say, you were alive when all this was happening. What did you do? Why didn't any of you take care of this? Why didn't you try to save the coral, save the world, and things like that? So it's kind of a guilt thing they put on people, but it's a good guilt thing, I think, to say, like, yeah, what did you do? Well, tried to use less plastic bottles and things like that. Oh, wow, great. You know, yeah, what did you do? What did you do? So, okay, Jill, I think we're going to close up.
Can I say one
Right?
quick thing?
What's next week's film?
Just,
Go ahead.
I just want to say one quick thing. I think with things like we're talking about now, I think that most people cannot connect what's happening to themselves. And so, like, what did you do for this environment? Is like, you know, I was never taught anything like this in school, and then when you get older, you're distracted by other things in your life, your jobs, your this, your, you know, aside from what we're going through now, and you don't always have time to think about that. And therefore, it's like using an example of smoking and lung cancer. I mean, my mother told me when I was very young that smoking causes lung cancer before they even proved that smoking caused lung cancer. But the connection between smoking and dying of lung cancer when you're 70 doesn't compute. I don't think climate change and coral and things like that compute in most people's minds until you make people aware. And I think that's got to be the big thing.
Someone put in the chat the question, what age group is this film, should see this film? And my answer would be every age group. I think every age group needs to see it. Maybe younger people because they can be the ones who make the change, but you know, it's not like we're gone. We're still here. There's still things we can do. I think every age needs to do it. And like I said, even if you saw this film and it moved you and you talked to other people about it or asked them to watch the film or something, that's doing something too. I'm not going to say it saves the coral, but it certainly doesn't hurt. It's helpful in some way to spread the word. Okay, I think we're going to conclude. Next week's film, you'll be getting your handout mailed to you. I actually did this one early. I think Jill was very happy that I did it early.
And send it out right now.
It's called Mission Blue, and it's about a woman who has spent an entire lifetime working at this. But it's an interesting story because she didn't really start out as an environmental activist or anything. She just started out as a scientist. But in a lifetime of work, what she saw, and again, we're underwater, just changed what she wanted to do with her life. And she's still around, and she's still working at it, and she's a very admirable story. So, Mission Blue.
So we'll send that out and a few of the links to some follow-up information, maybe later today or tomorrow.
Okay.
And we'll see you guys next Monday.
Okay.